Before the story begins, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know. What time do you usually watch videos? And don't forget to suggest the next story or content you'd like to see. Story 1. The apartment window that showed a stranger's bedroom. When Jenna first moved into her new apartment, the thing she loved most was the wide window in her bedroom. It stretched almost wall to wall, letting in a wash of city light at night and early morning sun that spilled across the wooden floor. The apartment was on the 12th floor, facing another building with mirrored glass, so she thought privacy wouldn't be much of an issue. If anything, she expected to see little more than faint reflections of her own living space bouncing back at her. But it was the second night in the apartment when she noticed something was wrong. She had been unpacking late into the evening, stacking books on shelves, throwing old sweaters into a donation pile, and trying to ignore the boxes she'd promised herself she'd deal with tomorrow. At some point, she glanced up at the window, maybe just to take a break and let her eyes wander. That's when she saw it. Instead of her own room reflected back in the glass, there was something else. Another room, lit faintly by a single lamp on a nightstand. The walls weren't hers. The floor wasn't the same. And in that other space, she saw a bed. A narrow, metal frame bed with tangled sheets and a shape lying beneath them. Jenna blinked hard, thinking maybe it was her exhaustion making her see things. But when she turned around to check behind her, her own bed was still neatly made, pillows stacked. There was no one in her room. Yet in the window, the stranger's bedroom continued to flicker faintly in the dark. She stepped closer. Her own reflection was gone entirely, swallowed up by the sight of the other room. The walls there were painted a pale, peeling blue. A dresser stood crooked in the corner, its mirror cracked diagonally. And on the bed, the shape beneath the sheets rose and fell with the slow rhythm of sleep. Her skin crawled. She told herself it had to be some kind of illusion, some weird refraction of light bouncing off another apartment, or a trick of the mirrored building across the street. But the angle was wrong. She shouldn't have been able to see that much detail. And more than that, the room she was seeing wasn't anywhere in the building opposite hers. She knew because she had looked earlier. Every single window across the way was dark and lifeless. Jenna shut the blinds, trying to laugh it off. New apartment, new stress. That's all, she muttered to herself. And for a while, she believed it. But the next night, the window showed the same room again. This time, the figure in the bed wasn't sleeping. It was sitting up. Jenna froze when she saw it. The sheets had been pushed down, and the person, though their face was hidden by shadows, was sitting stiffly as if listening. The lamp glowed weakly beside them, throwing enough light to outline their frame. She felt an irrational urge to wave, to test if they could see her too. But she stopped herself, gripping the windowsill until her knuckles turned white. If this was real, whatever it was, she didn't want to invite it closer. For nearly 5 minutes, she stood there, heart pounding, watching the figure. It didn't move except for the faintest tilt of its head, like it was waiting. Jenna backed away and left the blinds closed for the rest of the night. Over the next week, she avoided looking at the window altogether, but curiosity is cruel. One night, after convincing herself she'd imagined it all, she peeked again. The stranger's room was still there. But now it looked different. Messier. The lamp was gone, leaving the space dim, illuminated only by what looked like moonlight filtering through a curtain. The bed was unmade, sheets half on the floor, and there was no figure this time, at least not on the bed. Jenna leaned closer, searching the dark corners of the reflected room. That's when she saw it. A face. Not a full face, not clearly, but the faintest impression of eyes staring back at her from the cracked dresser mirror in the stranger's room. She stumbled back, her chair knocking over behind her. When she looked again, the window only reflected her own room. Just her. She almost called the landlord that night, but what would she even say? That her window was broken? That it showed things it shouldn't? It sounded insane, even in her own head. So she tried to ignore it again. But the dreams started after that. Night after night, she dreamt of the blue-walled bedroom. Sometimes she'd wake up standing in the middle of her apartment, disoriented, as if she'd been walking in her sleep. and every time when she looked at her window, she'd see faint handprints on the glass. Too high, too far apart to be her own. On the 12th night, Jenna decided to test it. She placed her phone on her desk, propped it against a stack of books, and pointed it at the window. She hit record and went to bed. When she woke up in the morning, the phone had shut itself off. The battery drained completely, though she'd left it plugged in. That alone was strange. But stranger still was the discovery she made when she went to plug it back in. Her blinds, which she'd left closed, were now open. And across the glass, faint but undeniable, someone had written 2 words in condensation. "Let me." Her breath hitched as she wiped the glass with trembling hands, the letters smearing away. But the weight of the words lingered, pressing in around her. That day, she skipped work and visited the building across from hers, desperate to prove that what she'd seen was just some trick of angles. She begged the doorman to let her look around. Said she might be renting for a friend. The man frowned. "That building's been empty for years," he said. "Condemned. Unsafe." Jenna insisted. After a long sigh, he agreed to let her peek through the lobby. The place was gutted, dark, smelling faintly of mildew. No electricity, no tenants, just emptiness. But as she stood in that ruined lobby, staring up at the 12th floor, she felt it. A prickle on the back of her neck, the sense of eyes pressing into her from somewhere high above. When she went home that night, she taped black cardboard over her bedroom window. But still, when she lay in bed, she swore she could feel the faintest glow of light behind it. A light not from the city, but from a small lamp on a nightstand in a room that wasn't hers. And sometimes, just sometimes, she swore she could hear the faint creak of a bed frame, as if someone on the other side was climbing out of bed, inch by inch, closer to the window that connected them. Story 2. The hotel glass that reflected a room that didn't exist. When you've been living out of suitcases for years, hotels begin to blend into one another. Same beige walls, same patterned carpets, same sterile smell of industrial-strength cleaner and recycled air. That's why when Marcus checked into the High Ridge Hotel off the interstate, he didn't expect anything different. Just another anonymous room, another faceless night. The High Ridge was old, though, an aging high-rise downtown that had once been glamorous in the 1920s, when movie stars and oil tycoons checked in with their luggage trunks. Its lobby still clung to that past, decorated with chandeliers that hadn't been dusted properly in decades, velvet couches sagging at the seams, and walls lined with gold-framed mirrors that reflected a grandeur long gone. Marcus was on the 12th floor, in room 1207. The hallway leading there smelled faintly of mildew, and the faded wallpaper curled in spots, revealing plaster beneath. His room, though, seemed ordinary enough. A king-sized bed with stiff white sheets, a desk with a flickering lamp, a dresser topped with a flat-screen TV bolted to the wall. The bathroom was cramped, with tiles cracked along the grout, but still functional. What caught his attention almost immediately, however, was the floor-to-ceiling glass window that spanned nearly the entire wall opposite the bed. It wasn't just a window, it was a reflective pane, almost mirror-like when viewed from inside, especially at night when the room's lights were on. Marcus liked that. He could see himself stretched across the bed, the muted city skyline glowing faintly behind his reflection. But something didn't add up. The first night as he unpacked, Marcus noticed the reflection in the glass didn't quite match his room. His bed appeared in the reflection, yes, but slightly off, angled differently, as if the layout on the other side wasn't identical. Behind the reflection of his own bed, there was a second lamp, a second nightstand. At first, he thought it was just the double-layered reflection of the glass. He brushed it off, turned on the TV, and fell asleep. The second night, it became impossible to ignore. Marcus had ordered takeout and was sitting on the bed with a plastic fork when he glanced up at the glass. His reflection looked normal, but behind it, the room in the glass seemed brighter, like someone had turned on an overhead light that didn't exist in his own room. And then he froze, fork halfway to his mouth. There was someone sitting on the bed in the reflection. A man. Not Marcus. His clothes were old-fashioned, slacks and a white button-up shirt, sleeves rolled up, collar undone. He was hunched forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor with his head bowed, as if weighed down by something unbearable. Marcus whipped his head around to the actual room. Empty. He snapped his gaze back to the glass. The man was still there, sitting, unmoving. The reflection didn't show Marcus anymore, just this other room, this other man. Marcus tried the light switches. He flicked them on and off, but the reflected room stayed constant, unaffected. He even waved his hands in front of the glass, but his movements weren't mirrored back. The stranger in the reflection didn't react. He slept poorly that night, curling against the far side of the bed, facing away from the glass. By the third night, Marcus thought he was hallucinating. Jet lag, stress, exhaustion. Maybe it was finally catching up with him. Still, curiosity gnawed at him. So he sat at the desk facing the window, notebook in hand, determined to watch. Around midnight, the man appeared again. Same clothes, same slouched posture. Only this time, he lifted his head slowly. Marcus's breath hitched. The stranger's face looked eerily familiar. It wasn't an exact replica of Marcus, but there was a resemblance, like a faded photograph of a distant relative. The jawline, the brow ridge, even the tired eyes, all echoed Marcus's own features. And then the man spoke. His lips moved soundlessly, shaping words Marcus couldn't hear. Marcus stood, heart hammering, and pressed his ear against the glass if he might catch something. Nothing. Just silence. The man in the reflection stood too, moving toward the glass, each step deliberate. When he reached the pane, he placed his hand flat against it. Marcus's instincts screamed at him not to move closer, but he couldn't help himself. His own palm lifted, hovering just an inch from the cool glass. When the two nearly touched, the stranger's face contorted. His mouth stretched wide, unnaturally wide, teeth bared in a grotesque grin. His eyes, so similar to Marcus's own, turned black, bottomless, swallowing up the faint glow of the room behind him. Marcus stumbled back, chair clattering to the floor. The reflection snapped. Just like that, it was his own image again, his pale, trembling self in the glass. The ordinary hotel room reflected back. No second lamp, no slouched figure, no black-eyed grin. Marcus barely slept. The next morning, he went to the front desk, demanding to switch rooms. The clerk, a woman with tired eyes, frowned when he gave his room number. 1207? She asked quietly. She leaned in, lowering her voice. We usually don't put guests there. That room, well, people say the glass doesn't always show what it should. Marcus pressed her, but she refused to say more, only offering him keys to room 905 instead. He moved immediately, but the damage was already done. Even in his new room, Marcus couldn't stop checking the windows, mirrors, any reflective surface at all. Each time he caught his own reflection, he expected to see someone else standing behind him. And sometimes, just for a second, he swore he did. The High Ridge Hotel was torn down 5 years later. Too old, too costly to maintain. Locals said it was a blessing, that the place was riddled with rot and things better left unspoken. But Marcus never forgot room 1207. And whenever he checks into a hotel now, no matter how new or clean or ordinary, he always pulls the curtains shut tight at night. Because once you've seen a reflection that doesn't belong to you, you never really trust the glass again. Story 3. The childhood home window that revealed someone sleeping. When I was a child, my parents bought an old colonial house on the edge of town. It was the kind of place that made adults marvel at its character, while kids like me saw nothing but shadows in every corner. The house creaked and groaned in the wind, its wallpaper faded, its wooden stairs worn down by decades of feet. But what stuck with me most, what I can't forget even now, was the window in my bedroom. It faced the backyard, overlooking a patch of woods that grew thick and black at night. The window itself was tall and narrow, its glass a little warped from age. During the day, sunlight poured through, and it looked harmless. But after dark, when the lights inside were on and the glass turned reflective, something about it unsettled me. It wasn't just that I saw myself in the reflection. It was that I sometimes saw things that weren't there. The first time it happened, I was 9 years old. I had been reading in bed with a flashlight, ignoring my parents' calls to turn the lights out. When I finally looked up, annoyed by the buzzing moths circling the lamp, my eyes caught the window. At first, I thought it was just me, my reflection, slightly warped. But then I noticed something that froze me mid-breath. There was a figure lying in bed, not mine. The reflection didn't show my small frame sitting up with a flashlight. Instead, it showed the bed as if someone else were using it. An older figure, curled under the covers, their chests slowly rising and falling. The blankets were tucked around them neatly, and their face was partly hidden in shadow, but I could make out strands of dark hair spilling over the pillow. I remember jerking my head down, staring at my own empty bed. It was just sheets rumpled from me sitting on them, no one there. But when I looked back up, the reflection hadn't changed. Someone was sleeping in my place. I screamed. My father came running, irritated, flipping the switch on the overhead light. When he glanced at the window, of course, there was nothing strange. Just my own pale reflection, wide-eyed and trembling. He muttered about nightmares and overactive imagination, tucked me in, and told me to sleep. But I didn't sleep. For the next week, I avoided looking at the glass at night. I turned my back to it, pulled the covers over my head, anything to block the window from view. Still, the reflection clawed its way into my mind. I couldn't shake the image of that other figure lying where I should have been. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I turned off the lights in my room completely, thinking maybe darkness would erase it. But the second I glanced at the glass again, there they were, this time clearer. It wasn't just some generic person. It was a young woman, her hair spread out in tangled waves, her face pale and sharp. She looked so peaceful, as though she had always belonged there. But there was something wrong with her eyes. They weren't shut, like someone asleep. They were barely open, just slits, as though she were watching me without wanting me to know. I remember pressing my hand to the window, trembling, whispering, "Who are you?" She smiled, just a faint twitch at the corner of her mouth. The next morning, I begged my mother to let me switch bedrooms. She brushed me off. There were no extra rooms, and besides, she said, "Kids your age see things. It's part of growing up." My father even joked that I was probably seeing my future self. Neither of them believed me. As weeks turned into months, the reflection became part of my nightly life. Some nights she wasn't there, and I almost convinced myself it had been imagination. But then I'd look again, and she would be back, curled in my bed, always with that same not quite asleep stillness. Sometimes her position changed, an arm outstretched, her head tilted toward me, but she never once moved while I was watching. Until the night she did. It was late, maybe past midnight, when I woke to a sound. Soft, rhythmic tapping. I sat up, heart hammering, and glanced at the window. She was there as always, lying in the reflection. But this time her arm wasn't under the blanket. It was bent at the elbow, her fingers lightly touching the glass from her side, tapping as if to get my attention. Tap, tap, tap. I couldn't breathe. My hand, without thinking, began to rise, hovering near the pane. She mirrored me. Only she was a fraction of a second ahead, like she already knew what I was going to do. When my fingertips finally touched the cold glass, hers pressed to the same spot on the other side. The smile that spread across her face was wider now, unnatural, stretching too far. Her half-open eyes were fully open at last, staring into mine with terrible intensity. That's when the tapping stopped. Instead, I heard a whisper. Not in the room. Inside my head, curling around my thoughts. A woman's voice, low and tired. "Let me in." I yanked my hand away and scrambled back into bed, hiding under the covers, shaking so hard I thought my teeth would break. But I could still feel the cool imprint of her fingers against mine, like the glass hadn't been enough to separate us anymore. The next day, I told my parents again. My father sighed. My mother frowned, but for the first time, they didn't dismiss me outright. My mother admitted that when she was a girl, she had sometimes thought the windows in her old house showed things that weren't there. But that's just what old glass does, she said softly, almost to herself. It remembers. That word haunted me. Remembers. We moved out of the house 2 years later, when my father's job took us across the state. I never saw the woman again after we left, though sometimes I dream of her. In the dreams, I'm back in that room, staring at the warped glass, waiting for her to appear. And she always does. But here's the part I've never told anyone. The night before we moved, I forced myself to look one last time. I told myself it was just glass, just reflection. And for once, the bed in the reflection was empty. No figure, no woman, no eyes. Just the room behind me, exactly as it should have been. Relief washed over me, until I noticed something else. The closet door in the reflection was open. In reality, behind me, it was shut tight. And just before I turned away, I saw a shape in the shadows of that open closet. A figure, standing very still, as though it had been waiting for me to leave. I think about that every time I catch myself in a window at night. I don't know if she stayed in the glass or if she found her way out into the dark places we never check. But I know this. I never sleep facing a window anymore. And I never, ever touch the glass. Story 4. The office window that reflected movements after hours. Sam had never considered himself superstitious. He was the kind of man who worked late, thrived on deadlines, and never shied away from staying behind when the office emptied. His colleagues joked about how he was more furniture than employee, how the faint glow of his computer screen in the dead of night was almost part of the company's ambience. The office, located on the 12th floor of a high-rise, was all glass and chrome, with panoramic windows that gave a view of the city below. Those windows also gave him a strange sense of calm when he needed it. But one Thursday night in November, while he typed away in the near silence, the city lights twinkling below him, Sam noticed something unusual. The reflection in the long glass pane of the conference room across from his desk didn't quite line up. At first, he assumed it was a trick of his eyes, the fatigue that came with working too late. In the reflection, the room looked the same. Chairs lined neatly around the table, a faint stack of folders at one end. But there was a movement, a flicker of motion, a shape passing quickly through. He spun around. The conference room was empty. He laughed nervously to himself, shook it off, and returned to his screen. But when he looked back up, the reflection was different again. Now the blinds were partially drawn in the mirrored glass, though behind him, the actual room's blinds remained rolled neatly at the top, undisturbed. Sam tried to reason it out. Maybe it was a trick of the lighting, the glare of monitors blending with the dark outside. Maybe the fluorescent bulbs above distorted things. But as the night stretched on, the reflection grew bolder. At 10:13 p.m., he saw the reflection of a man sitting at the conference table. The figure wasn't clear. It was as if the glass showed him through static, a pale blur in the shape of shoulders, a head bowed as though reading papers. But when Sam turned around, the room remained empty, silent, except for the hum of the building's heating system. He stood and walked toward it, heart pounding. Nothing. Just the neat arrangement of furniture and the sterile scent of disinfectant. Back at his desk, he glanced at the glass again. The figure was gone. The following night, Sam returned, though his nerves hummed with tension. He wanted to test himself, to prove he wasn't losing his mind. He left the conference room door slightly ajar this time, so he could see directly into it without relying on the reflection. But the glass betrayed him again. At 11:04 p.m., the mirrored surface showed two people now, one standing in the corner, facing the wall, while the other sat at the table, motionless. In the real room, visible through the gap, no one was there. Sam's pulse hammered. He grabbed his phone, turned the camera toward the glass, and snapped a picture. When he checked the image, his stomach dropped. The photo didn't match what he saw with his eyes. Instead of two indistinct shapes, the screen displayed a crystal-clear figure of a man in a dark suit sitting rigidly at the table, his head slowly lifting, as though acknowledging being watched. Sam dropped the phone, the clatter echoing in the emptiness. That was the first night he left early, but he didn't stay away. Something about it gnawed at him, like unfinished work. Over the next week, he returned again and again. The reflections escalated. Once, he saw the mirrored version of himself working in the office, though in reality, he was standing in the doorway, staring at his own doppelganger, typing furiously. Another night, the reflected conference room showed blood spattered across the walls, though the real one remained pristine. It wasn't just visual. Sam began to hear things. The shuffle of footsteps behind him when no one else was on the floor, the quiet creak of chairs being moved though they stood untouched. Once, while gathering his bag to leave, the reflection showed the door of the conference room slowly closing. He turned. Nothing moved. When he looked back at the glass, the reflected door was shut completely. The breaking point came on a stormy Friday. Rain streaked the massive windows, thunder rumbled far away, and the building was nearly empty. Sam told himself he'd work until 9, then leave, but the reflection caught him again. This time, it wasn't the conference room it altered. It was his own desk. In the mirrored surface, he wasn't sitting there anymore. His chair was empty, the glow of his monitor casting light on papers scattered across the desk. Yet Sam sat in that very chair, alive and present. Panic clawed at him. He stood abruptly, and the mirrored figure appeared in the reflection behind his chair, tall, faceless, hands resting on the headrest like it was about to lean in close. Sam spun so fast his neck cracked. Nothing. He didn't even grab his bag. He fled, bolting to the elevators, refusing to glance at any glass on the way down. The following Monday, Sam handed in his resignation. He didn't give a reason. He couldn't. His colleagues laughed, said he finally burned out, that he'd been married to that office long enough. But Sam knew what he saw, and he didn't dare return to confirm it. Still, sometimes at night, when he's home in his small apartment with its narrow kitchen window, he swears he catches movement in the glass. A flicker of someone walking in a room that isn't his, the faint reflection of furniture he doesn't own. And though he keeps the blinds down now, he can't shake the feeling that what he left in that 12th floor office didn't stay there. It's still watching, waiting for him to look long enough for it to show itself again. Story 5. The cabin window that showed faces no one knew. When Caleb bought the old hunting cabin in the Smoky Mountains, he told himself it would be a sanctuary, a quiet place where the stress of city life couldn't touch him. The cabin had been empty for nearly 2 decades, and the realtor warned him that neighbors whispered about it being strange. Caleb laughed it off, assuming it was small-town superstition. He was a rational man, and a cheap property was too good to pass up. The cabin itself wasn't remarkable. Weather-worn logs, a sagging porch, and a single window that faced the thick woods beyond. That window struck him immediately. It was bigger than any of the others, its frame reinforced as if someone wanted it to last longer than the rest of the structure. The glass was foggy, rippling slightly like water, but he chalked it up to age. The first few nights were uneventful. He chopped wood, cooked simple meals, and enjoyed the silence. On the 4th night, though, something shifted. As Caleb sat at the small dining table writing in his journal, the cabin window caught his eye. It wasn't a sound that drew him, just a sudden awareness, like the hairs on the back of his neck prickling. He looked toward it and froze. Pressed against the glass were 3 pale faces. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, maybe branches or reflections. But no, these were faces. 2 men and a woman, all motionless, all staring inside with dark, expressionless eyes. Their skin was so pale it seemed almost luminous against the dark woods behind them. Caleb's breath caught. He leapt up and yanked the door open, storming onto the porch. Nothing. The yard was empty, moonlight pooling against the ground. The forest stood still, heavy with crickets and the distant cry of an owl. His heart pounded as he walked around the side of the cabin, scanning the tree line. No footprints, no rustling bushes. He circled back and returned inside, trying to convince himself it was exhaustion playing tricks. But when he looked at the window again, the faces were gone. That night, Caleb barely slept. Every creak of the cabin made him jolt awake. By morning, he had almost convinced himself he'd hallucinated. But when evening came and shadows grew long, he couldn't stop staring at that window, waiting. On the 6th night, it happened again. He was lying on the couch when a faint tapping sound broke the silence. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the window. He sat up slowly, dread thickening in his chest. The 3 faces were back. Only now there were 5. They weren't pressed close this time, but hovering just beyond the glass, floating slightly above eye level, as if they weren't bound by the ground at all. Their expressions hadn't changed. They just stared, eyes dark and bottomless. Lips curled into the faintest hint of smiles. Caleb felt paralyzed. He didn't move, didn't breathe. The tapping grew louder, as if coming from inside the glass rather than outside it. Summoning his courage, he grabbed his flashlight and rushed outside again, shining the beam across the yard. Nothing. The forest loomed silently. He pointed the light at the window from outside, but from that angle, it reflected only the trees and himself, no faces. Yet when he returned inside, they were still there, waiting, watching. That was the night Caleb stopped sleeping near the window. Over the next week, the faces multiplied. At first 3, then 5, then 9. By the 10th night, there were 12. Men, women, even children. All pale, all unknown, all silent. He tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a trick of the old glass, some warping of light, or even his own reflection fractured. But the faces were too distinct. They blinked. They shifted positions slightly. The worst part was the familiarity creeping into them. Caleb swore one of the children resembled a boy he remembered from elementary school, someone who had gone missing in third grade. Another face looked eerily like a coworker who had died in a car accident last year. The realization sent a cold wave through him. These weren't strangers. They were echoes of the dead. By the 12th night, Caleb had stopped journaling. He sat in the dark with the curtains drawn tight, drinking heavily just to numb the terror. But even with the curtains closed, he couldn't escape the sensation of being watched. The cabin seemed to hum with their presence, the air heavy and oppressive. He considered leaving, but every time he started packing, something compelled him to stay. The window wanted him there. On the 15th night, Caleb reached his breaking point. He decided to smash the glass and end whatever curse was attached to it. He grabbed the fireplace poker, walked to the window, and ripped the curtains open. The faces were gone. For the first time in weeks, the glass reflected only the cabin interior. His table, his lamp, himself. He almost cried in relief. But then, slowly, movement stirred in the reflection. His reflection didn't move when he did. It lagged. It smiled when he didn't. Caleb's blood turned to ice. Before he could swing the poker, a pale hand pressed against the inside of the glass. His hand, but not his. The reflection leaned forward until its face was pressed to the pane, grinning wide, teeth too sharp, eyes too dark. And behind it, hundreds of faces crowded the reflection, filling the window with a mass of pale, silent watchers. Caleb staggered back, dropping the poker. The tapping returned, louder this time, frantic, coming from inside the cabin walls themselves. He covered his ears, screaming, but the sound burrowed deep into his skull. When morning came, the cabin stood quiet. The window was intact. The neighbors who passed by noticed the curtains were gone and the furniture overturned inside, but Caleb was never seen again. The realtor eventually listed the cabin for sale again, warning the next interested buyer about the strange window. And if you stand before it long enough, the locals say, you might catch a glimpse of Caleb himself. Pale, silent, one more face among the countless others staring back. Windows are meant to show us the world outside, but sometimes they reveal something we should never see. Tonight's stories reminded us that not every reflection belongs to us, and not every room is meant to exist. If you ever catch yourself staring into the glass and realizing it's staring back, remember, you're not the only one watching.